Folks, welcome back. You know, the African National Congress really doesn't learn. I had a conversation with the now departed Neil de Beer a few months back when I was in South Africa, and I asked him a question because of the continuous provocations committed on the part of the African National Congress, undermining U.S. national security and our relationship with South Africa. And I said to Neil, I said, are they doing this intentionally, or are they just that stupid? And Neil, in his very familiar voice, looked at me and said, Chris, I know these people. I've worked with them for decades. They're really that stupid. Well, one begins to wonder if it is stupid or if it is malicious. On Thursday, October 3rd, 2025, a blacklisted Ilyushin IL-76 military cargo plane flew into Upington in the Northern Cape of South Africa. The aircraft, owned by Abakan Air, has been blacklisted by the U.S. Treasury Department since June of 2024 because it's involved in transporting Russian military equipment. So let's start with that. That alone is a bad look. The South African government claims that they're now in negotiations with the United States to reduce the tariffs imposed on South Africa for its immoral, illicit, and World Trade Organization violation tariffs and quotas against the United States. Reciprocal tariffs. But South Africans say they're negotiating those down now. Well, why in the world would you allow a blacklisted Russian cargo plane to land in South Africa? It doesn't make any sense. Now, this provocation comes on top of two other provocations that we're publicly aware of, and there have been several more which the public is not familiar with. The two in question, of course, are a Russian transport plane landing at Waterkloof Air Force Base, and also the famous Lady R incident in Simonstown, in which the Lady R, a Russian blacklisted cargo ship, dropped cargo at Simontown's naval base, picked up by Special Forces plated vehicles in the dark of night. And the government ignored the public's request for information for several months until former U.S. Ambassador to South Africa, Reuben Brigady, exposed this and claimed it was military equipment, which precipitated yet more difficulty in the U.S.-South Africa relations, but only because South Africa's government ignored our polite diplomatic request for 5 months to explain what was going on. So what's going on here? This is the third public instance. Well, I can tell you with a fair degree of certainty that this is not the first time that Russian IL-76s have landed at Upington and offloaded equipment. So why would they be doing it? Well, there's a lot of speculation going around now that it's about nuclear because Iran's nuclear facilities have been destroyed. And
what you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about? What you talking about, Willis?
I should add to this story that this plane flew to Tehran, where it sat on the ground for an undetermined but long period of time, supposedly according to the press, and from Tehran flew to Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and then on Upington. So there's all kinds of wild speculation, not the least of which is that it's bringing nuclear weapons to South Africa or equipment to build nuclear weapons for Iran's nuclear program. Well, that's unproven, and that's just rampant speculation. But that speculation is fueled by the fact that the Vostrop weapons testing range, which was used for decades by South Africa's nuclear testing program, is not that far away. Vostrop is a weapons test range associated with the military airfield in South Africa's Kalahari Desert. Built back in the 1970s, the range itself was built to support tactical bombing and other conventional weapons testing. But it also housed two deep underground shafts for South Africa's secret nuclear weapons program between 1976 and 77. Now, those shafts were never used for detonations, but they were sealed in 1993 under the supervision of the International Atomic Energy Agency. So some people are speculating that that's what it's all about. Well, the plane came fully loaded, apparently, according to witnesses, and all of its cargo was unloaded. Then it departed Upington and landed at Lanseria, empty, with no cargo on it. The aviation watchdog Blacklist.Aero warned South African service providers not to refuel or service that plane due to outstanding debts. But somehow payment was arranged by a local company in Upington. Now, they owed money for landing fees and for fuel to the tune of something like 17 million rand. Now, Blacklist.Aero is a London entity that works to expose aviation operators and suppliers with a debt history. They wrote to local aviation service providers in South Africa. In a letter, they requested that suppliers not provide fuel or support services to the aircraft. Abakan Air currently owes more than 17 million rand for aviation services. In response to this, Abakan threatened legal action against that London watchdog. Here's the problem with this sort of thing in the 21st century. People can find these things out. Social media, people take pictures at airports, they send messages, they call people instantaneously around the world for free, and we track aircraft via the internet. Flight Radar 24 is one site that does that. Now, the last flight visible on Flight Radar 24 for that aircraft shows that before the long flight to South Africa via Dar es Salaam, it had been in Iran for a considerable amount of time. Now, it's not uncommon for these sort of aircraft to illegitimately turn off their transponders so they're not visible for applications like Flight Radar 24. Again, this is a blacklisted aircraft. What was it doing in Iran and what was it doing in Dar es Salaam? Now, what could possibly be happening here? I've mentioned already the conspiracy theory about it being nuclear, which I'm not buying for a second. But what else could it be? Well, it could be ammunition for the South African National Defense Force, which does use some Soviet equipment, which is captured during the Bush War. And the Lahatla Training Center is in the Northern Cape, not all that far from the Uppington field. So perhaps that's what the pallet loads were for: military equipment, ammunition for training. Or here's more rank speculation, but this comes on the heels of something very interesting happening. You see, the ANC is in trouble again for the money that it owes to the company that produced posters and election material for it back in 2019. It still owes Bezuidenhout 85 million rand. Now, the media breathlessly told us that this debt was paid back in late 2023. Oh, they say that was all paid, yes, because, Jabba the Hutt, now Lady Pandor, went to Tehran, and she came back, and just days later, suddenly the ANC, which had had the embarrassment of the sheriff of the High Court inventorying its property for confiscation and auctioning, suddenly had 102 million rand to pay this company off. Now, the media said that the debt was paid. Apparently, that was never true. Apparently, 85 million is still owed to Bezuidenhout. So was it ammunition? Was it nuclear related? Or is it pallet loads of cash? Of course, the Iranians have tons of US dollars, courtesy of Barack Hussein Obama, who shipped pallet loads of money over to them, US dollars. Presumably, they still have some of it. So what's it all about? Nukes, Iran, Russia, remote landing, cargo offloaded, departing empty-handed. What's going on here? As I said, the sheriff of the court inventoried that property in 2023. Well, this week, the sheriff of the court removed office furniture, computer equipment, and kitchen appliances worth about 140,000 rand from Latuli House, the ANC's headquarters in Johannesburg, on the same day that plane landed in Uppington, Thursday. But that 140,000 rand is a drop in the bucket, a drop in the ocean, actually, of the 85.5 million debt the ANC has to settle that they owe them from the 2019 election campaign, after South Africa's captured media falsely and breathlessly reported that debt was paid in December of 2023. So what's going on here? Here's the bottom line. Whether it's simply ammunition for training, legitimate for the SANDF, or it's something to help Iran's nuclear program, that could be problematic, or it's pallet loads of cash to pay the debts of the ANC, which doesn't seem implausible, to say the least. This is a bad look. South Africa knows the United States is not happy with Iran. We just bombed Iran to stop its nuclear program. And South Africa lets a Russian cargo military aircraft owned by a civilian company fly from Tehran to Dar es Salaam. What were they doing there? To Uppington, out of the way, to escape prying eyes. Not a good look. Ladies and gentlemen, South Africa thus far has avoided the ire of Donald Trump, but they are stepping on the man's last nerve. South Africa is not a priority for the United States. It's not a focus for the United States. But these actions by the ANC continually poke the bear, and eventually the bear is going to turn and sit on the ANC. What say you, South Africa, Mzansi? Cheers.